in just a second. Let me save this. All right. All right, assignment 7, for loops. So in this assignment, basically what we were trying to do is convert kilograms to pounds, right, in increments of 3. So 1 pound is 2.2 kilograms, 3 pounds is 6.6, so on and so forth, all the way up to 199. All right, so just looking at this program, you can see something is being repeated over and over again. And if you look at the title of the program or the assignment, it's for loops. So we want to use a for loop here. Why? Because we know there's a beginning and we know there's an end. It starts at 1 and it ends at 199. So we want to use a for loop. We can't use a while loop, but a for loop is more appropriate in this instance. So let's go over this. So the first thing we do is create a project, Java application, assignment 7. All right. All right, so assignment 7. If I look at the instructions again, all right, the first thing I need to print out is kilograms dash pounds. Okay. And before I get started, again, I don't tolerate plagiarism. I've had to report somebody already, and I will report people as it comes along. Just don't do it. You know, you're gonna get a 0 if you get caught. If you don't get caught, congratulations, I guess. But if you get caught, you're gonna get a 0, and I will report you. So just don't do it. It's better if you just submit something that doesn't work, but it's close, than something that was just copied from the internet. All right. So I just want to get that off, get it out there before I get started. But anyway, the first thing I see here is I need to print kilograms and then pounds, right? One time, right? So that I look at this and it doesn't need to be inside our loop because I'm just printing this one time. So let's print that. So how do we print again? We use system.out.print. And in this instance, I'm going to use print line because I want my console to go to the next line. So system.out.print line, kilograms dash pounds. All right. So now I have my kilograms and I have my pounds, that first print statement right here. And then the next thing I look at, okay, now I'm going to start my loop. So let's start our loop. For, and I'm going to name this kilograms, int kilograms equals 1. Kilograms is less than or equal to 199 because I want to go all the way up to 199. And then kilograms, I could do plus plus, right? You can do plus plus, you can do minus minus, but in this instance, we're going all odd numbers. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. So if you notice, each time it's adding 2. So I'll do plus equal 2. And what that basically does is this statement right here is the same as saying kilograms equals kilograms plus 2. I'm just adding 2 kilograms. That's what this statement right here is doing, adding 2 kilograms each time. So every time we go through the loop, you'll add 2 to kilograms, so on and so forth. All right, so we look back at our problem. 2.2 pounds equals 1 kilogram. So let's calculate our pounds. Let's do this. All right. Double pounds equals kilograms times 2.2. All right. So now we have our pounds. The last thing we need to do is print it out. System.out.println kilograms, right? That's the first thing we want to print out. Concatenate that to another string, which is our dash and spaces, then concatenate that to pounds. All right. So again, when I add in kilograms, that is a variable. It's an integer variable up here. However, when I put this in my system.out.println line, it turns into, or it's converted into a string. And so with strings, you want to add to strings and make it longer, you concatenate them with the plus sign. And so that's what I did. I got the number kilograms, concatenate that with space dash space, and then concatenate that with pounds, which is a double, but was converted into a string right here. And then we run this. And there you go. Now your program may be a little bit better on formatting than mine, but I accepted it either way. That would have just been your personal, make your program look better. But this is the end result. Any questions? Assignment 7? It's pretty straightforward. Questions? If you have questions, you can put it in the chat as a private message to me. I'll answer it. You said what, Panache?
I think that one is a little bit straightforward.
Yeah. And I kind of did something similar last week, except I did, I think, pounds and, not pounds, but miles and kilometers. All right. No questions. I will continue with the slides. We're talking about methods. So methods, what are methods? Methods are a way of organizing your code, right? So say, for example, you have a really long main method, and you want to kind of separate it out into individual pieces that it makes it a little bit more clear, and you can reuse code. So that's what a method is for. What is a method? It's just a collection of statements that are grouped together to perform a specific operation. For example, say I have a list of numbers, and I just want to compute the average of that list of numbers. I can create a method that does that. And so for whatever list I have, I can just call the method and compute the average, right? I have a list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's my list of numbers. I send that list to my method returns back the average, right? That's all I want that method to do, just compute the average of a list. Or we've done a couple programs where we had to read in what somebody said and convert it into an output. For example, rock, paper, scissors. We read in a 0. If the user put in a 0, that means they're rock. If they put in a 1, that means they're paper. A 2 was scissors. If I remember correctly, that's how it went. I can create a method that I send a 0 to the method. It returns rock. I send a 1 to it. It returns paper. So on and so forth. So anytime somebody enters anything into the computer, right, 0, 1, or 2, I can just send that input to the method. It'll return what they put it. Or converting dollars to yuans, right? My method converts from dollars to yuans or vice versa. So all I gotta do is send the dollar amount, returns back the yuan, right? That method, it just has a specific task, and that's what it's doing. A method that we've already used in all of our programs is the main method, right? The main method is, as the name implies, the main method. It's where your program starts anytime in Java, right? No matter what you're doing, your main method will be your starting method. And if we run our programs from the command line, which we haven't done in this class, we run it from NetBeans, but we can create our programs and run it from the command line like Linux. You can pass a couple arguments in to your program. That's what that string args is for your main method. It's for those commands. But basically from the command line, it sends that command to the JVM, which is the Java virtual machine. And the Java virtual machine then runs your main method. So why do we use methods? So for example, like I said before, maybe your main method has a lot of different code in it. And it's confusing to try to figure out what's going on inside your main method. Well, we can separate that code into methods for clarity. Or we want to group certain code together based on what its objective is. For example, computing the average of a list of numbers. Or, right? Because all of these can be applied. We want to reuse code. Instead of just copying it from place to place inside your program, we can put all that code inside a method and just call that method, right? Call the method, return what the method is saying. That's it. You don't have to copy it, because if you have a copy and say there's an error in your copy somewhere and it gets replicated 15 times because you copied and pasted it 15 times, now you'd have to fix it 15 times. Whereas in a method, you don't have to fix it once. So all methods, regardless of whatever the method is, has a signature, right? And that method signature is basically how you declare your method. So the main method, for example, this is its signature: public static void main string args. That string args is a list of all of the arguments that you pass in from the command line. We haven't worked with arguments in this class, and I doubt we will. So it hasn't been important to you yet. But in the future, if you ever do make your programs runnable from the command line, you can possibly receive some type of argument from your user when they run your program. And a lot of Linux-based programs have arguments and options that you can set when you try to run it. And that's what your string args would do. It would take those and you can use it inside your program. But this is the method signature. So that first word is a Java keyword and declares that the method is public, private, or protected. Okay? So let's talk about public, private, and protected. All right? A public method means that you can access this method anywhere in your program. And by that, I mean, so if we create a new project, lecture 14, and let me do this real quick. I don't know why it went away. Hold on just a second. All right. There we go. So I created a new project. I have my public static void main. Now NetBeans does that automatically for you, right? But let's create another method. Let's create a method public static void max number. All right, I created a new method right here, public static void max. It takes in a list of numbers or an array of numbers, which we'll talk about, I think, next week. And it's just a list of numbers, right? That's what it is, and it's returning the max of all, whatever the max number is. Well, if you notice over here to the left, we have our class, which is lecture 14. Lecture 14 is in the package lecture 14. But in Java, if you want to organize your code, I can do a new Java package, and let's say, I don't want it there, I want it up here. New Java package, common, right? And this would be like common things I would use across my program, or common things that I'm just using in this across different classes, right? And if I have another file here, new Java class, a new class, let's say common module, a common module class. I don't know, it's just something I'm coming up with at the top of my head, right? Inside this common module class, I can use this max method, right? I can use it since it's public. However, if I make this private, a private method can only be accessed within the current class. So meaning I can only use it inside this lecture 14 class. I cannot use it inside the common module class because it's private. Similarly, if this is protected, I can only use it inside this package, the current package, which is lecture 14, and any subclasses of this. So in Java, you can have subclasses which basically is like a child. You can have a child-parent relationship whereby one class can inherit all of the attributes of a parent class, but then also have some unique attributes by itself. Kind of like a parent and a child, right? A child inherits all the attributes of their parent, technically or essentially, in this example. And the child is still unique. They still have some unique characteristics that their parent does not have, right? Java is the same way, except it's a little bit more strict in that all of the characteristics of a parent is inherited down. But then you can have other characteristics of a child, right? And that's what protected allows you to do. You can access the method inside the same package and any subclasses. In this class, literally CSC 201 Programming 1, we will be focused on public methods mainly. We won't really do a lot of private and protected. We'll mainly focus on public. All right, back to our method signature. The next word, static, is optional, right? That's an optional keyword. However, if you want to call this method from the main, you must have a static keyword in your method. It's required. The main method is static, so any methods that it calls must be static as well, right? So that static keyword, what does it mean? Mainly used for memory management. And in today's day and age, memory management isn't as critical as it used to be, right? Now, you can kind of get away with poorly managing memory, if you will, because we have the Java virtual machine that does a lot of the memory management. So it's not as critical today, except when you want to call this method from the main. And we'll talk about calling methods a little bit later in today's lecture. But just know that it must have that static keyword in your method signature if you want to call that method from the main. All right. That static keyword can be applied to variables, methods, blocks, and nested classes. We won't work with nested classes in this course. And we probably won't use many static variables, so mainly focus on static methods. All right. So I wanted to give you an example of a method without that static keyword. You see here this method, the method objective is to get the max from a list of numbers. The static keyword is not used, but it cannot be called from the main, and I'll show you that a little bit later. So again, the static keyword is not used in this instance. All right, we continue. The next word is the return data type. For the main method, it doesn't return anything. It doesn't return a number, it doesn't return anything. So it's void. If you have a method that doesn't return anything, it would be void as well. For example, in my research, I have a program, I have a machine learning algorithm that goes off and edits the data and then trains my machine learning model, right? That training process takes like 12 hours. So the data editing method, I want it to go off and do what it's doing in a separate process. It doesn't affect anything else. So that doesn't return anything. It's just void. It just goes off and does something. But if I have a method that gets the max, I want it to return the max number. So that return data type, it's for once the method finishes all the code inside the method, you can return something. You could return a number, you could return a list, you could return a float, string, double, integer, it doesn't matter. In the future, we'll talk about objects, or not in this class actually, in future programming classes, but you return those, you can return a lot of different things for methods. And the return data type just tells that method inside the signature what to expect. So here's a method that returns an integer, right? The max number from that list. It returns it. All right. The next keyword is the actual name of the method, which in the case of the main is main, right? But you can name it anything. I named that other method max, right? And so the name is important because it identifies your method and is used to call the method. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the slides, calling methods, but you'll use the name to call it. Additionally, if you're using methods to organize your code, it makes it easier to understand what you're doing. For example, if I named a program compute average, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory what that method should be doing, computing the average or something, right? However, you still want to use common naming conventions, right? So lowercase the first word, uppercase all subsequent words. So like I did down here, compute average, lowercase the first word, uppercase the second word, or the first letter of the second word, so capitalize that word. All right. And then finally are the formal parameters, okay? The formal parameters are what you would be passing to that method. So what is that method going to use to do its work? If I'm trying to get the max from a list of strings, I want to pass, or a list of numbers, I want to pass that list of numbers so that it can use it, right? So those formal parameters, what type of data can be passed to the method? So in this case, in the main, it's a list of strings, which would be those arguments or options that I was talking about earlier. Methods can have 0 or many parameters, depending on what you need that method to do. For my research, there are no parameters, right? I don't need to pass anything to those methods because they go off and edit the data, which takes 20 minutes, right? Or the other method that trains the model takes 12 hours, so I don't need to pass anything, just start your work, basically. And you do this because inside your main method, you want it to be as clear as possible, right? You want your main method to start your program and then run different things. You don't want all of your code in the main method because that gets confusing. Especially if somebody is coming on after you, all your code in the main method, I mean, it's hard for me to identify what you're doing, right? Because programming is like writing, and typically no two people write the same, which is why plagiarism is so easy to identify. What was I going with that? Oh, somebody coming on after you, it may be challenging for them to kind of understand what you were doing, right? Because it's so unique, it's so specific to whatever the programmer is doing. In this instance, you. If I came on after you and I tried to figure out 500 lines of code, what you're doing, could you put some of this inside a method so it's a little bit better organized? All right, so the main method has a single form parameter, right? It just has one, string args. Just one form parameter, which is a list of strings. However, you can have some methods that have multiple parameters, form parameters. So in this method, it's a compare to method. If A is greater than B, it returns a -1, which is why I have int here, because it's returning a number, as my return data type is an integer. If B is greater, it returns a 1. If they are equal to each other, it returns a 0. A simple compare to method. And this method has 2 formal parameters. All right, so actual parameters. Actual parameters are the actual data or variables that you use when you call a method. So if we look at the previous slide right here, right, we have our formal parameters, A and B. Well, let's say when we run our program, we create the integers number 1 and number 2, right? Those are our 2 numbers, and we read it in from the console. If we compare them, number 1, number 2, those are our actual parameters. Whereas A and B are our formal, because that's in our method declaration or method signature. When we call the program, the actual numbers we use are our actual parameters. So here we're calling our method. So we create 2 numbers, number 1 and number 2. We have an int comparison, because if you remember, that compare to method returns a 1, -1, or 0, depending on what's greater or if they're equal. And then our actual parameters that we're comparing are number 1 and number 2, right? And I'll show you this in the code itself, how it works. But those are our actual parameters. And so calling methods. Calling methods is when you actually want to use that method in your code. All right, it's all nice. You declared your method, you create the signature, your method runs or it looks good. But when you actually want to use it in your code is when you're calling it. So you call a method by using the method name and adding your actual parameters, like this right here. All right, we use the name compared to, and we pass in our actual parameters. We call a method when we want to use it. It's calling the method. And we look to the previous slide. We called our method on this line. In comparison equals compared to number one, number two. Any questions so far? I'm about to jump over and show you some coding examples.
No, sir, we good.
All right. Anybody else? Well, if you do have a question, again, you can put it in the chat as a private chat, right? Private chat message to me, and I'll answer it to the class. If you don't feel comfortable, speaking in front of the class or asking questions in front of the class, just let me know. If all of this is going over your head, let me know as well, and we can set something up, and I'll help you. I want all of you to be successful. I want all of you to pass. So if this is going over your head, if you're not getting it, please let me know. All right, let's jump into some coding. All right, new project, Java application. Next, I already have a lecture 14. So I already have this lecture 14 right here, right? And I started this method down here, public static void max int numbers. So what this is, this right here is called an array, which we'll talk about, I think, next week. An array is just a list of numbers. In this case, a list of integers. This could be double, which is a list of doubles. This can be string, which is a list of strings, so on and so forth. But for this example, I'm going to do int because I just want to get the max number from an integer, from a list of integers. So you see I have my main up here. And I'm putting this inside a method down here because I don't want that in the main. This is a very specific objective for this code, getting the max of a list of numbers. And I may want to reuse this method later on in the future, right? Or in the code multiple times. So I want to put this inside a method so that I can do that. So inside this method, we want to get the max from a list. So obviously the first thing we need is a variable max equals integer, and then I'm going to set this equal to min value, which is the minimum possible value an integer can be for this system, right? You can do integer.max value, which is the maximum value, but since we're looking for the max, I want anything above this to replace it. All right, I need a for loop. Int I equals 0, I is less than numbers.length. So this is similar to how we iterated through or looped through strings, right? Strings are a list of characters, if you remember. It's an array of characters. I plus plus. All right, I have my for loop, and I'm missing some brackets. Or have too many. All right, so now I have my for loop. So inside my for loop, I just want to check if the current number inside my list is greater than my max. So if numbers at index I, because I would go from 0 to whatever the length is greater than max, meaning it's bigger, we're going to set max equal to that number. Numbers I. And actually, to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to create another variable, current number equals numbers I. If current number greater than max, set max equal to current number. Also, I forgot to mention in Java, Java works by pass by value for methods. And that means that it's just passing the value of this. In other programming languages, it can be passed by reference, which means that you can pass the actual memory location of that array, of that integer, and you can modify the memory location of it. In Java, it passes you by value, which is just a copy of whatever's at that memory location, and it recreates it, it copies it. Except for arrays. Arrays might be a little bit different. But that's okay. That's outside the scope right now, I believe. I think we might talk about that next time. So I have my method max. Int max equals integer.min value. That gets the minimum possible value so that anything greater than that will replace it, right? Because we're looking for the highest possible number. If I set this just equal int max equals -1, I mean, I don't know what my list is. The minimum value could be -43. That's the that's the maximum value. And everything else is smaller than that. So -1 wouldn't work here. I want to get the minimum possible value so that anything greater than that here will replace it. Max equals current number. So once this for loop ends, I should have the maximum number set equal to max. And then I can return max. But I have an error here, right? I have an error. What does the error say? Incompatible types, an unexpected return value, right? I'm returning an integer, but if you look at my method signature, our return type is void. So I need to change that. I need to change that to an int. All right, so now this returns the maximum number. Let's test it. So int, I'm creating a list of integers. List1 equals new int. Again, creating a list. 45, and I'm just going to put in some random numbers. All right, that should be good. So if you look at this list, if I look at this correctly, I think the maximum number is 54,651. So that should be our max. All right. So int list1 max equals calling my method, and I'm passing list1 as the actual parameter. Okay. I called my method using its name, and I passed list1 as the actual parameter. Down here, again, this is the formal parameter in our method declaration, and you must use this name inside your method. Okay. So numbers, you must use your formal parameter name inside your method. However, you can pass different lists into it. So system.out.println, the maximum for list1 is, and then concatenate list1 max. That should return my max value. Let's debug this so we can see line by line what's going on. Hit the debugger, and we see our list1 down here. It created our list1, and if I hit the plus sign, you'll see all our numbers inside our list. Okay. This is also called an array, and we'll talk about arrays next week. All right, so now the debugger is on this line. If I step over, it's going to jump over this and already get it, but I want to step into this method. So I'm going to hit the step into button up here and step into that method. All right, so now I'm inside the method. Int max equals integer.min value. And if you look down here, you might say, well, what happened to our list1? Well, now inside our method, it's a different scope, right? It's a different scope. We're using numbers. So numbers, all of those values were passed into numbers from list1. So we step over this line. Now we see max equals the minimum value, which is like negative 221 billion or something like that, or 214 billion, negative 2 trillion, I think. That's the minimum possible integer value. So we go into our for loop over. So we have I equals 0. Well, at index 0 of numbers, the integer 45 in current number equals 45. So we step over this again. Is current number greater than our current max? Yes, it is. So now max is going to be set to current number. We step over again. Current number is 54,651. Is that greater than our current max, 45? Yes, it is. Steps in, set it equal to. And then we know each subsequent number is probably less because we were looking at the array. So now current number is 51, right, at index 3. That's not greater than our current max. So we're just going to step through this, step over, because we know 54,000 is the greatest. But say, for example, my list is read in from the console. I don't know what the greatest number is, but this method will get it, right? So we step over this, and it finishes. It returns our max value, which is 54,651. Step over, it jumps back up here, jumps down, and it prints it out, and the program ends. The maximum for list 1 is 54,651. All right, cool. Well, like I said before, I could reuse this list or this method for a different list. So if I copy this, paste it down here, let's do list 2 max, pass in list 2. The maximum for list 2 is list 2 max. Let's change the numbers in here. Comma. I'm just putting in random numbers. All right, so I think this should be the largest number. Let's run it. And perfect. So now you see, I was able to reuse this method for 2 different, completely different lists. Right? And that's the beauty of a method. I can reuse code without having to write this over and over again. If I didn't use this method, I would have to write all of this code right here and set list 2 equal to all this. Instead, I just call the method, print it out. Pretty simple. All right. So that's one method. Let's do a different method. Let's do our compare to method like we did in the slides, or we had in the slides. Let's go back down here. Let's write a new method header or signature. Public, because in this class we're going to use public mostly all the time. Static, I want to use it inside the main. Int, because it returns a 1 if A is greater, a -1 if B is greater, or 0. Int, compare to, int A, int B. Right? We have 2 variables. Again, inside this method, we want to compare A and B. If A is greater, return a -1. If B is greater, return a 1. If they're equal to each other, return 0. So if A is greater than B, return 1. Or -1, I'm sorry. Else if A is less than B, right? That means B is greater, return 1. And if those 2 are false, that means that they must be equal, return 0. All right, so a simple compare to method, right? And I can reuse this method over and over and over again with whatever 2 numbers I want to compare. So one thing I didn't mention is comments. Comments help to make your code more readable as well. So if I put a couple comments in here, it'll be pretty much self-explanatory what these methods do. So let's put a comment up here, compares 2 numbers. Okay, so now I definitely know what this method is doing. It's called compare to, so it's comparing something. This comment tells me it's comparing 2 numbers. And then inside the method, I can put additional comments. For example, right here, if A is greater than B, return -1, okay? That's clear. If B or A is less than B, return 1, all right? And lastly, since A is not greater and nor less than B, they must be equal, return 0. All right, so now with comments, proper naming conventions that are appropriate for my method, and all these other comments, anybody coming along after me would know exactly what my method is doing. So let's actually use this method. Let's call it up here in our main method. Int number1 equals -6. Int number2 equals 6. And then let's call the method int comparison equals compare to number1, number2. All right, we're comparing those two numbers using our method below. And system.out.println comparison, concatenate in our variable comparison. Okay, let's debug this. So the first thing, two things we're going to do is create number1 and number2. Bam, bam. So you see down here, we create number1 and number2. -6 and 6. And please, y'all, get familiar with the debugger, because if you're not getting the expected outcome that you want, if you debug it, you probably can find out where in your program it's going wrong. So now our debugger is on this line. Instead of stepping over, let's step into this method. So I'm going to click the step into button again. Steps in. Is A greater than B? No, A is less than B. It's -6. So it's going to skip that. Is A less than B? Yeah, it is less than B. So we're going to step into, return 1, jump back out here. And now we're on to the next one. And you see comparison equals 1. That's what our method returned. Run it through the end, and you see it prints out 1. All right? That's a compare to method, real simple. You can do methods for many different problems, many different objectives. It doesn't matter. Wherever you see fit, you need a method. If your code, if you know this is a very specific objective that your code is accomplishing, probably really want to put that in a method, right? If you plan on reusing it over and over again, probably want to put it in a method, right? So for this example, why would I use a method if I already know that -6 is less than 6? That doesn't make any sense. But what, say for example, I want to read this in from the console. Scanner input equals new scanner system.in, right? Control-Shift-I. All right. Now let's say int number1 equals input.next. Number2 equals input.next. Next in, I'm sorry. Right. Now, if you look at my program, there is nothing in here explicitly declared. There are no actual numbers in here, which is a good thing, right? We want to avoid explicit numbers or literals, I'm sorry. Literals inside our program, string literals, numerical literals, those are no good because it's static. It can't change. However, for this program, number1 and number2 can change, right? System.out.println, enter 2 numbers. All right. All right, so we're telling the user to enter in 2 numbers. We read it in from the console, right here and right here. We compare them and print it out. So if I run this, enter two numbers, 56 and 98, right? So that should be a 1. Yep. Run this again. Let's reverse the numbers, 98 and 56. Should be a -1. Yep. And actually, let me think. 98. Oh, greater than, yep. So this is compared to greater than, yep. So it's 98, 56, 1. If I enter in two equal numbers, let's do 56 and 56, it returns a 0, right? And that compare to method is very easily identify what it's doing. And if you're looking at my program and you're saying, what does this method do? You scroll down to my method, I got all these comments. It's very clear what I'm doing in this method. All right, any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. If none of this makes sense, if you don't understand anything with code, let me know early and often, and I can help you.
Will we be doing this for this week's assignment?
Say that again, I couldn't quite hear you.
I said, will we be doing something similar to that for this week's assignment?
Yes, something very similar to methods.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Do you have any office time today?
I do. Today is not a good day, but tomorrow I can meet with you, or Wednesday or Friday.
All right, what's a good time for tomorrow?
For tomorrow, let me check my schedule. I got a lot going on, y'all.
You want me to just email you?
Yeah, just email me.
All right.
All right. Anybody else? All right, well, if there's no other questions, that's it for today.
Have a good day.
You too.
All right, have a good day.
You too. All right, I'll see you all on Wednesday then.
All right, have a good day.
You too.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yep.